Treatment strategies for generalized anxiety disorder using cognitive behavioral therapy. Presented by Tina Benecchia,
Taylor Pollard,
Dave Patterson,
and Adriano Serviziati.
Generalized anxiety is a serious psychiatric condition affecting some over the course of their lifetime, and like many other disorders, its root cause is unclear. It is often characterized with psychological states of fear, apprehension, and uncertainty. Causes of the condition are varied, but commonly attributed to stress, adverse childhood experiences, a medical condition, or a predisposition to the disorder. The manifestation of symptoms for sufferers of the disorder is varied, but before we can begin to consider treatment, understanding the contextualized experience of the individual is critical. We know that generalized anxiety disorder usually begins in young adulthood and persists throughout their lifetime, with half of those with the condition being symptom-free for extended periods of time. Yet, the probability of developing 2 or more anxiety disorders is 35.6%, with heterotopic comorbidities being present in 40.7% of known cases, making it the 9th leading cause of illness among young people. Let us consider the common concerns for this demographic. The transition from adolescence to young adulthood is defined by many changes. It's a transformative time where an individual becomes more independent and begins to contemplate their identity, character, principles, and priorities. Relationships become deeper and more complicated. It is no wonder that stress is a significant part of the equation. High rates of relapse are reported among sufferers, with many experiencing effects throughout their lifetime. Triggers and maintaining factors of worry fuel the mechanism of generalized anxiety. An analytical mind is curious and solutions-focused, whereas an anxious mind ruminates over dire possibilities, constantly asking themselves, what if? What if I don't meet my deadline? What if I don't get that job? What if I'll never be able to afford a home? What if I'm alone and never meet that special someone? What if my parents don't approve of my choices? What if? Avoidant behavior contributes to stress, germinating negative automatic thoughts, strengthening maladaptive behavior, or intensifying cognitive distortions. Beck's cognitive model of psychopathology explains the reasoning behind such biases. Reason has it that a predictable failure is better than an unknown catastrophe. While short-term safety-seeking outcomes are experienced, long-term maladaptive schemas become habit, and the consequences of avoidance intensifies. The meaning of worry itself could propagate more worry. When examining the interwoven structural relationship among metacognition, emotional flexibility, affective style, and worry, the predictor of worry was found among those with maladaptive affect expression and emotional rigidity. We know that worry is linked to many psychopathologies and can even be helpful when it challenges us to grow. Worry becomes pathological when it leads to subjective fear, a rigid and limited mindset, when negative thoughts are repeated and unpleasant images create distress. When maintained over time, there's an increased risk of developing generalized anxiety disorder. The last proponent of stress we will consider is doubt. One can be distrustful of others or themselves. It undermines confidence, feeding indecision, and for some, it can be paralyzing and chronic. The negative effects of doubt affect one's self-esteem and sense of worthiness. Bear in mind that the causes of generalized anxiety are impacted by genetic and environmental factors. Biomarkers focusing on neural correlates help doctors when considering pharmacological interventions, while environmental factors made up of political, social, cultural, and economic factors influence one's reaction to the world around them. By observing both internal and external factors, context to the condition can be accounted for. Although stress can be managed and therefore controllable to some degree, the causes of generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, are initially and habitually viewed as uncontrollable. They seem insurmountable. They include early childhood trauma, which is responsible for activating primal schemas, medical conditions, and some other form of predisposition. To provide perspective, let's consider the impact of the pandemic on young adults under 36 years of age. Since the onset of COVID-19, life became restricted and social isolation became a global phenomenon. Social distancing reduced connection and interaction with others. For young adults, symptoms of GAD deepened. Isolation and loneliness are known to be significant stressors of mental health. Meta-analytical reviews confirmed the interconnectedness of loneliness, sleep disturbances, anxiety, and hyperarousal or reactivity to stress, which was accompanied with intrusive thoughts. All of these contributed to a decline in well-being. Those who previously had the disorder reported a 50% increase in anxiety and a 74% increase in sleep disturbances. Contemporary maladaptive coping styles expanded. The exposure to misinformation in the form of fake news and conspiracy theories eroded trust. As people turned to social media for distraction, smartphone addiction worsened. Increased consumption of alcohol, cannabis, and junk food continued to erode healthy lifestyles. Generalized anxiety disorder is a pervasive problem in Canada with 2.4 million Canadians reporting symptoms. The demographic characteristics include a greater representation among women, with most being in middle age, single, divorced, or widowed individuals, those that are unemployed or those with lower household incomes, and individuals that are Canadian-born. The prevalence of generalized anxiety disorder in Canada make it a burdensome disease for individuals and society. According to the DSM-5, worry is the hallmark of generalized anxiety disorder. It's a condition characterized by a pervasive feeling of stress, anxiety, and worry that's excessive, persistent, or feels uncontrollable. It's destabilizing and deemed to be a mental health illness if experienced for 6 months or more.
This anxiety and worry are associated with 3 or more of the following symptoms present for more days than not in the last 6 months. Feeling restless or keyed up, easily becoming fatigued, experiencing difficulty concentrating or the mind going blank, feeling irritable, experiencing muscle tension, and encountering sleep disturbances such as difficulty falling or staying asleep, or restless, unsatisfying sleep. This disturbance is distinct from other mental disorders, and the anxiety, worry, or associated physical symptoms cause significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Importantly, this disturbance is not due to the physiological effects of substances or other medical conditions. In the realm of cognitive behavioral therapy for generalized anxiety disorder, one of the first steps is functional analysis. It's all about understanding the nitty-gritty details of our anxieties. When does it happen? Where are you? And under what circumstances does the anxiety rear its head? For instance, if someone came to me and found themselves engulfed in anxiety during a work presentation, we would dissect the situation, the when, where, and what that led up to it, essentially creating a roadmap for anxiety. This process lays the foundation for effective therapy by pinpointing the specific triggers that need attention. Psychoeducation is another vital component. It's akin to furnishing each individual with a toolbox for managing their anxieties. This toolbox isn't tangible, but rather a set of knowledge and awareness that makes the therapeutic journey more meaningful. Understanding how anxiety works and being aware of the tools available to us may help to increase motivation for positive change. It's like preparing an individual for what lies ahead in therapy, creating a sense of direction and purpose. The emotional and behavioral approach is all about managing your emotions, learning relaxation techniques, and constructing a psychological toolkit to navigate anxiety. Consider relaxation techniques as an example. These are simple yet potent tools like deep breathing, which act as a shield against overwhelming emotions. The goal here is to find balance and breaking free from negative thought patterns. It's about regaining control and creating a more centered version of each individual. As we transition into the cognitive approach, step 1 involves self-observation and thoughts. Picturing a time when thoughts were racing, perhaps when faced with an impending deadline. This step is about taking a step back and becoming a neutral observer of your thinking patterns. Can the individual isolate those thoughts from their emotions? It's a journey towards understanding and gaining more control over our thoughts. Step 2 of the cognitive approach is all about changing the content of our thoughts. Cognitive biases are filters that can distort how we see the world and become the focus. By tackling these biases, we can aim to help future clients to see situations more objectively. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses that allow them to perceive things more clearly and without distortion. The ultimate goal of all previous treatment options discussed is to break the pattern of automatic negative thoughts. These thoughts may still occur, but if individuals are able to redirect themselves using CBT techniques, they can disrupt the cycle and remind themselves of ways to better cope with their anxieties.
Behavioral activation debuted in the 1973 paper, Pleasant Activities and Depression by Lewinson and colleagues. The treatment was originally conceptualized to treat depression by identifying and scheduling pleasurable activities to increase contact with sources of positive reinforcement. Lewinson and colleagues understood depression as resulting from a broad deprivation of positive reinforcement. The treatment fell out of favor by the 1980s, due in part to a dissatisfaction with behavioral therapy's neglect of cognitive constructs. A review of CBT treatments by Jacobson and colleagues, published in the year 2000, is largely credited for restoring interest in behavioral activation. They found that behavioral activation produced positive client outcomes that persisted after a 2-year follow-up. Furthermore, behavioral activation was praised by Jacobson and colleagues due to its ease of training therapists and teaching clients. Many different variants of behavioral activation have been developed and refined over the years since Jacobson and colleagues' 2000 review. While these interpretations of behavioral activation adhere to the core principles of behavioral activation, they differ in their methods in which they prompt clients to achieve positive reinforcement through activity scheduling. Contemporary behavioral activation treatments have redefined positive reinforcement from its traditional definition of the experience of pleasant or pleasurable activities as a means of obtaining reinforcement to a more broad description, which includes any environmental events that make healthy, symptom-reducing behavior more likely. During the course of behavioral activation, therapists help their clients to re-engage in life in multiple ways, including increasing experiences of pleasure, prompting approach behavior in the presence of strong cues for avoidance and adverse emotion, problem solving, engagement with activities and behaviors which lead to experiences of accomplishment and mastery, and engaging in meaningful and difficult behaviors that are consistent with the client's core beliefs. The implementation and use of behavioral activation can be understood by its 10 core principles. Principle 1. The key to changing how people feel is helping them change what they do. Principle 2. Changes in life are associated with symptoms, and short-term coping strategies may inadvertently maintain symptoms over time. Principle 3. The clues to figuring out what will reduce symptoms for a particular client lie in the ABCs. The ABCs can be understood through a typical functional assessment, which considers the antecedents to a behavior, A, the consequences of said behavior, B, and the behavior itself, C. Principle 4. When creating an activation plan, structure and schedule activities that follow a plan, not a mood. Principle 5. Changes will be easier when starting small. Principle 6. Emphasize activities that are naturally reinforcing. Principle 7. Be a compassionate coach. Principle 8. Emphasize a problem-solving empirical approach and recognize that all results are useful. Principle 9. Listen understand, and remain action-oriented. Principle 10. Troubleshoot possible and actual barriers to activation. An example of behavioral activation's implementation as a treatment for generalized anxiety disorder can be understood from the case study of Jay. Jay reported anxiety stemming from his work. This anxiety affected his interpersonal relationships, particularly with his wife. Jay wanted to overcome his anxiety and resume his relationship with his wife, prior to how it had been to his anxiety. Jay's short-term coping strategy for his anxiety was to shut down after work and ignore his wife. Jay and his therapist identified natural past behaviors which were positively reinforcing and reduced his anxiety. Together, they started small, and Jay planned to get his wife her favorite cookie on his way home from work. Later, Jay and his therapist expanded upon the positively reinforcing behavior of spending time with his wife by having Jay set aside time to plan and implement weekly date nights. Although behavioral activation was originally conceptualized as a treatment for depression, it has been proven to be efficacious in the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder. A meta-analysis by Stinnett and colleagues, which included 28 studies and 1,025 participants, found that behavioral activation resulted in symptom reduction on par or better with other generalized anxiety disorder treatments, such as pharmacotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, problem-solving therapy, and psychodynamic treatments in adult populations. These findings were echoed in a study by Asvati, which compared behavioral activation therapy with cognitive therapy based on mindfulness, and found the two produced similar cognitive avoidance and emotional regulation symptom reduction in adult individuals with generalized anxiety disorder. Berg and colleagues compared exposure-based therapy and behavioral activation and found that behavioral activation resulted in more rapid declines in anxiety scores, lower anxiety scores, and greater participant-rated improvement at post-treatment. Based on data from a meta-analysis and systematic review by Bourbieu and colleagues and Fredrickson and colleagues, respectively, which included data from 24 research articles, the following recommendations for optimal adjunct exercise with cognitive behavioral treatment for generalized anxiety disorder were produced. The ideal program for exercise combined with CBT for the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder is supervised, moderate intensity aerobic exercise for 45 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week for 6 or more weeks. Moderate intensity exercise is superior to high intensity exercise interventions based on outcome measurements of anxiety symptoms and the increased participant dropout rates observed in high intensity exercise interventions. Symptom reduction was found to be related to the amount of time spent moderately exercising in such a way that more frequent and longer durations of exercise were related to greater symptom reduction. Longer treatment periods not only resulted in both greater symptom reduction, but also the more durability of symptom reduction over time. Exercise must be supervised, as unsupervised exercise can result in low client motivation to complete the exercise regimen, as well as uncontrolled intensity of exercise. While exercise was found to be an efficacious adjunct treatment for participants, some participant characteristics did impact treatment. Individuals who are more active at baseline are more likely to complete treatment. However, individuals who are older and/or report low activity levels benefit the most from treatment. Treatments which were found to be compatible with adjunct exercise: group CBT, individual CBT, psychotherapy, group stress management, brief cognitive programs, exposure-based CBT, internet-based CBT, virtual reality exposure therapy, and imaginal exposure therapy. While the addition of exercise to CBT could be viewed as a collaborative treatment, Khalsa and colleagues, among others, practice yoga-enhanced CBT, which could be viewed as its own unique treatment modality. This treatment blends Kundalini Yoga and CBT principles, The rationale is that CBT aids clients to replace the content of their maladaptive thoughts with new adaptive thoughts, while Kundalini Yoga aids clients to accept their maladaptive thoughts and move past them. These yoga practices can aid clients with rumination prior to the replacement of these thoughts with CBT. Kelsa and colleagues' Yoga Enhanced CBT was comprised of 6 weekly 1.5-hour sessions. The session's agenda included roughly 30 minutes of yoga/meditation, instruction and experiential cognitive restructuring using both traditional and alternative CBT interventions, and a group discussion/process to end. Kelsa and colleagues found that Yoga Enhanced CBT was proven to be effective in the reduction of anxiety levels, trait and state, in individuals with generalized anxiety disorder. The demographic characteristics of participants had no impact on the effectiveness of Yoga Enhanced CBT, although the majority of participants were women, which may impact the generalizability of the findings. When comparing exercise combined with CBT, as well as Yoga Enhanced CBT with behavioral activation, a few key characteristics need to be considered. Outcome rates between Fredrickson's exercise combined with CBT studies and Kelsa's Yoga Enhanced CBT study produced a 68% mean rate of statistically significant symptom reduction. Exact outcome figures were not available for behavioral activation. However, outcomes were comparable to other common anxiety treatments. Although exercise and yoga enhanced treatments have been shown to be effective in diverse populations, individual characteristics such as age and baseline activity rate do impact effectiveness. Through multiple studies including a wide range of participant demographics, behavioral activation has been shown to be highly generalizable. Exercise and yoga-enhanced treatments have been shown to have high dropout rates. These dropout rates may be connected to the intensity of exercise, as high-intensity exercise is not sustainable for most people long-term. Behavioral activation was consistently reported to have acceptable dropout rates of 20% or less. There are many barriers to the implementation of exercise and yoga-enhanced treatments, such as having a therapy office equipped for aerobic exercise programs, having a therapist being trained in instructing exercise programs, and clients' ability to engage in moderate activity. Behavioral activation has long since been praised for its ease of implementation, both in therapist training on the treatment modality, as well as ease of explanation to clients. Overall, behavioral activation is superior to exercise combined with treatment due to its lower dropout rates, vastly easier implementation, and higher generalizability. That being said, the two treatment modalities do not need to be exclusive. Many positive reinforcing behaviors involve aerobic activities. If the client was formerly active prior to their affliction with generalized anxiety disorder, then a combination of the two treatment modalities would be appropriate. This would allow the client to reap the benefits of both treatment modalities.
Controlled breathing was originally developed as a technique for combating panic attacks in the 1980s. Humans have a natural tendency to breathe rapidly when preparing for action, scared, or when excited. This rapid and shallow breathing can lead to physiological sensations which, when perceived as dangerous or unbearable, can help fuel an individual's anxiety. Controlled breathing was initially introduced to CBT as a means of addressing the symptoms of panic disorders. In more recent years, however, it has been shown to be effective with other presenting challenges such as PTSD and generalized anxiety disorder. Oftentimes, controlled breathing draws heavily from yoga and meditative practices. While results have been promising, researchers urge practitioners and future researchers to be mindful of the influence public hype can have on the measured efficacy of treatment. This is especially important with controlled breathing, which has gained lots of attention in the media in recent years. Studies have shown that controlled breathing, defined as deep, slow, and measured, can have a positive impact on young adults managing anxiety. A 2021 study even showed a reduction in anxiety symptoms among young adult participants after just a single session oriented around controlled breathing exercises. Another study found that young adults who participated in a 5-week program focused on controlled breathing exercises experienced long-lasting benefits. Interestingly, this study used both self-guided and clinician-guided methods, finding similar results with both, although the clinician-guided participants benefited slightly more. This is important for CBT, where one of the goals of treatment is to help our clients become their own therapists. Controlled breathing is impactful, yet practical enough that it can be smoothly incorporated into a young adult's life outside of therapy sessions. Controlled breathing can be paired quite naturally with a couple of other CBT treatments and interventions. It can be a useful tool for helping a client during a behavioral experiment. Should a client find themselves feeling panicky, anxious, or too scared to continue with the experiment, controlled breathing can be introduced before helping them to move forward in a graded way. Controlled breathing also pairs quite well with physical exercise. Yoga in particular has naturally incorporated it into its practices. Clients can integrate controlled breathing into activities like walking as a way of bringing focus back to their current state. When integrating controlled breathing with other treatments, interventions, or assignments, it is important to be mindful of the potential for it to develop into a safety-seeking behavior if a client begins to believe that they need controlled breathing in order to avoid their anxiety symptoms worsening. Chelsea was 24 years old and living with her parents after a few years spent traveling abroad. She had been experiencing anxiety symptoms and felt that they were getting worse. She described herself as spending most of any given day worried about the future, about her lack of abilities, and about what others were thinking of her. Her therapist wanted to give her some tools that she could use in her daily life to help combat the anxiety. They worked on controlled breathing in a session, and Chelsea found that it did help to alleviate some of the symptoms. The therapist reviewed the ways that breathing impacts anxiety and repeated the exercise one more time. They then decided that Chelsea would practice controlled breathing twice a day for a week in between their sessions. Behavioral experiments are a product of CBT's lengthy behavioral legacy. They use a planned activity that the client can participate in either during or in between therapy sessions. This activity will test the validity of their existing beliefs, construct or test new ones, or contribute to the development of a shared cognitive formulation. Evidence supporting whether behavioral experiments are more or less effective than exposure is still somewhat limited. However, some recent research has had promising results. Typically, behavioral experiments can be either hypothesis testing or discovery-based. Hypothesis testing has been the most commonly used format. However, if a client does not have a hypothesis already formed, discovery can be a useful path and beneficial to developing that important shared formulation. They can also be either active or observational. This depends on whether the nature of the client's anxiety is rooted in the beliefs about themselves or others around them. A unique feature of behavioral experiments is that they can often require the therapist to take an active role, potentially venturing outside of the office with the client. Behavioral experiments, when well designed and planned based on a shared formulation, can be suitable for any client who is willing to give them a chance. Instead of being restricted by age or other demographic factors, they are more likely to be impacted by a poor design, a therapeutic relationship that is not strong enough, or the therapist's own worries and anxieties. Several studies have been conducted with young adults at university mental health clinics. One of these studies found that brief therapy utilizing CBT was highly effective with their clients. Behavioral experiments can often bring about a sudden change in a client's cognitive process and automatic thoughts. Given how many young adults attend universities, colleges, or other places of learning, this provides a real opportunity for behavioral experiments to be used effectively. Not only can it provide insightful moments for clients in a time-effective manner, but campuses provide a series of opportunities for behavioral experiments to be conducted safely. When appropriate, behavioral experiments can also be a part of a longer-term cognitive bias modification program. Cognitive bias modification has been shown across multiple studies to be an effective way of addressing anxiety among clients. Behavioral experimentation is in many ways a cognitive technique, and as such it pairs well with both behavioral and cognitive interventions. It is important to draw a distinction between experimentation and exposure. Both are used as a method of addressing a client's anxiety, however they are fundamentally different techniques with different treatment goals. In vivo work is a common collaborative partner of behavioral experimentation. We have already discussed the fact that therapists may need to accompany their clients out of the office and into the real world. Doing so can greatly expand the opportunities for experimentation. The therapist might be a direct participant in more observational experiments, or can be a source of support and confidence for the client in more active experiments. Behavioral activation can also be used as a collaborative treatment. The experimentation process can allow clients to attempt new behaviors and assess their thoughts and feelings about them. A detailed and structured plan for both during and after any experiment is also important, and especially so should new or intimidating behaviors be involved. Casey was a first-year student at university and found that he had been experiencing worsening anxiety symptoms over a couple of months. He began to worry that he was going to fail all of his classes if he did not stay at least 1 week ahead in the readings for each class. After a discussion with his therapist, they decided to conduct an experiment where Casey would choose the class he was doing best in and not read ahead for 1 week, but instead use that time to go for a walk and talk to his friends. Casey was nervous about this but committed to the experiment. In the end, he found that his grades did not suffer and he felt more energized in class having taken a break. This changed his belief and he began to realize that he could afford to take a break and balance his life better. Several CBT treatment options have been shown to effectively reduce anxiety symptoms in young adults. Based on the research reviewed for this assignment, an argument could be made for either controlled breathing or behavioral experiments. Controlled breathing introduces a physical intervention and relaxation technique, which several studies have shown to be effective when dealing with anxiety among young adults. Behavioral experiments provide an opportunity to directly challenge, test, or change a client's beliefs about themselves or others around them. In this way, they can have a more profound impact on a client's therapeutic process. Young adults are accessing virtual therapy at high rates, and the need for brief therapy in campus settings needs to be considered as well when choosing a best treatment option. One of the primary goals of CBT is to help a client become their own therapist. With this in mind, the evidence would suggest that controlled breathing is the preferable option of these two. It is more easily applied to a wide range of anxiety cases, can be taught virtually, and can be applied as a useful intervention by a client without the assistance of a therapist. As always, the best treatment option will vary greatly depending on the shared formulation between therapist and each individual client.